Good evening. I'm Megan of Bookseller at Literati Bookstore. Tonight, we're pleased to welcome Grace Perry to our At Home with Literati series in support of the 2000s Made Me Gay. She will be in conversation with Cameron Scheetz. For our attendees, the chat is closed, but I will be dropping links to purchase the 2000s Made Me Gay from Literati throughout the event. You can also use the Q&A feature on your toolbar to submit questions at any time, and I'll ask a selection at the conclusion of the event. A reminder that you can shop for more books at literatibookstore.com for curbside pickup and shipping to your home anywhere in the United States. We are also open for in-person shopping. We ask that you consider a $5 donation to sustain our virtual programming. You can think of it as this week's or this month or this year's subscription. Donations can be made at literatibookstore.com/donation. Otherwise, we simply thank you for your attendance this evening or this morning or this afternoon, depending on where and when in the world you may be joining us. Now allow me to introduce tonight's author and moderator. Grace Perry's work has been published in a variety of outlets, including The New Yorker, New York Magazine's The Cut, BuzzFeed, Outside, and Eater. She's also a longtime regular contributor to The Onion and the feminist satire site Reductress. Most of her work, comedy and journalism alike, interrogates the intersection of queerness, pop culture, and the internet. She lives in LA. Cameron Scheetz is a Los Angeles-based entertainment journalist and associate video producer for pop culture website AV Club.
Great. I think we take it away.
Here we are.
Hi.
Welcome to, I'm so thrilled to be here in beautiful Ann Arbor, Michigan with you.
Yes, here we are in Michigan in the Eastern time zone, right? Wink, wink.
Pure Michigan, Great Lakes, Great Times, etc.
Pure Michigan all the way.
No, like one time I saw they have a shirt, the state of Michigan has a shirt that's, what is it? No salt, no sharks, no worries. And I like so regret not buying that shirt. And I've been like hunting it down ever since. I could probably find it on the internet, but I would rather discover it in person.
No, I mean, you have to buy it there. That's the type of thing that if you don't actually buy it in Michigan, then
I have to buy it in Michigan. No salt, no sharks, no worries.
So spoiler, we're not in Michigan, but we do both love it greatly. We're both Midwesterners at heart, so it is a special place for us. But thank you for having me. I'm so excited to talk with you about your book, The 2000s Made Me Gay, on shelves now. The 2000s made us gay, I should say. I think before we really get into it, I want to tell you just like how much, if you didn't already know, how much I feel like our lives overlap in terms of just general timeline. Like I am also a late 1989 baby, aka old, but also like deeply closeted well through college. I ran cross country. Church was an important part of my life. Yeah, I mean, not long into high school, but like enough to be like, what is going on here? Why is this like a thing? There's a whole other book to be written about that probably, but
yes.
But yeah. So I, reading this book kind of checked off a lot of boxes. It's very, very, very familiar for me, as I think it'll be for a lot of people. But before we really get into it, I know that you had an excerpt you wanted to read for us to kick us off. So I think I'll throw it to you for that.
Great. Yeah. So I am going to read part of in my essay called Harry Potter and the Halfassed Gay Character, which is about Albus Dumbledore being like declared gay by J.K. Rowling and the sort of gay but not gay thing that exists within the Harry Potter universe. So I'm going to read that. Let me see if I have to tell you anything else. Oh, but so up top, the only thing I need to tell you about is like I at first I opened the essay discussing the the J.K. Rowling kind of casually dropping at some reading or some talk that she wrote Albus Dumbledore is gay. And this was after the 7th book had come out and everybody lost their mind. There was all these op-eds about it. And there was sort of this conversation about like whether or not it like counted because there was nothing like explicit in the text that was like Albus Dumbledore is gay. So that's all. Okay. But back to that question the New York Times asked in 2007, when J.K. dropped the bomb that she wrote Albus Dumbledore as a gay man. If an author embellishes upon characters, but those details don't appear in the text itself, Do those extra narrative details count? In other words, when J.K. Rowling taps send on a tweet about how there was once no bathrooms in Hogwarts, she did this once, does that detail ascend to the Harry Potter canon? Is Dumbledore's sexuality officially part of the wizarding universe? I neither have nor care to find an answer to this question. I can see the argument for both sides and can see myself also being bored to tears as each side makes its case to me. What I do believe, though, is that queerness exists within the world of Harry Potter, but on a very precarious does it or doesn't it count basis. It exists with Dumbledore, sure, but even more so in the indisputably non-canonical world of Harry Potter fan fiction. Online, fans pen their stories about canonical couples, Harry and Ginny, James and Lily, Ron and Hermione, which, in terms of sheer absurdity, pale in comparison to non-canon ships. Fans have dreamt up millions of words of Harry Potter erotica, including one where Draco Malfoy runs an in-school business selling polyjuice potion for the explicit purpose of allowing others to turn into and have sex as him, Draco. Madam Pince and Professor Slughorn banging the restricted section of the library, and Professor Snape and Hermione engaging in worship fetish in the bejeweled prefect's bathroom. Thank you, Al Gore, for your internet. Slashfic, the subgenre of fan fiction that reimagines characters in queer relationships, runs rampant in the online Potter world. I've encountered a steamy Ginny and Cho hookup in the Quidditch showers, a one-night tryst between Harry and Neville in Berlin after the Battle of Hogwarts, and a particularly beguiling one where a 20-something Dumbledore goes into an underground sex club/dungeon in Knockturn Alley, where he meets Gellert Grindelwald, who repeatedly punishes Dumbledore's ass with a paddle with the Deathly Hallows symbol carved into it. But the biggest slash ships online are Drarry, Draco and Harry, and Wolfstar, Sirius Black and Remus Lupin. Revisiting the books as a gay adult, yeah, these two pairings do reflect adolescent queerness in the canon itself. Draco and Harry's mutual hatred is a full-blown obsession, an infatuation that leads Harry to save Draco's life in book 7. As for Sirius and Remus, the two lithe boys spend their Hogwarts glory days transforming into canines and running off into the night together. It's easy, at least for a gay fan, to imagine where that might go. The point is, if Rowling can bulk up the Potter stories post-publication, so can random fans online. Sure, Rowling's tweets carry more weight than Archive of Our Own posts from 2007 do. But given the sheer magnitude of Potter universe expansion in the form of slashfic, I'm equally convinced of Sirius and Remus's boyhood romance and Dumbledore's non-straightness, which is to say I'm moderately convinced. All right, there we have it.
Thanks for reading that excerpt. I think there are like any number of avenues we could go down in discussing this book, but I wanted to kind of start on this chapter. It's an early one because Harry Potter just truly had like a chokehold on pop culture throughout the 2000s. I mean, it was just, we were getting the books, we eventually were getting the movies. And of course, for you and I, like, we were kind of growing up alongside Harry Potter. So this, as thorny as it can feel to talk about and try and unpack a lot of Harry Potter now because of certain things that have been said online, Dumbledore being gay notwithstanding, like this obviously meant a lot to both of us. And so, I was happy to start there. I mean, could you talk a little bit about, like, as much as you can remember, what was it about, before we get into the slash fiction of it all, what was it about these books, these stories, these characters that like really, really drew you in at first?
Man, I mean, I think that you sort of hit the nail on the head when you say that we grew up with them, which is like such a corny phrase, but like it always felt like I was right at the same age that Harry was when he was experiencing, you know, as each book came out. So I think I was like, you know, I was like 9 or 10 probably like 9 when I first read the first couple books. And then like by the time, you know, the 7th book came out, we were also 17. So there was that element of like seeing Harry and Ron and Hermione go through, you know, especially, you know, it's so funny. Early in the pandemic, I re-listened to all of the books on audiobook, which was like this very comforting and very fun experience. but it's funny seeing like Rowling gives these like sort of equal weight to like Harry's like, oh my God, like Voldemort's trying to kill me again, but like I need to get a date to the Yule Ball. So you have these very like teenage things that are happening at the same time as like I am like the wizard messiah and like I'm literally could be murdered at any moment. But I think it's those very normal teenage things of like having first crushes and not knowing how to talk to people and feeling awkward and feeling, you know, self-conscious and you know, whatever, loving sports and your teammates and like all those very teenage things that like honestly are probably what drew me to the books, because like as much as that story of, you know, good versus evil, all of that, you know, the Voldemort of it all, like I think really, especially when I was like in middle school, like what I took away from it was like, oh my God, I want to go to Hogwarts and like experience this world and like be a teenager in this world. So I think it was really more of like the kind of like more boring human elements of it that like drew me to it as a kid, you know?
Yeah, definitely. But the whole escapist side of that, which you also talk about in the book, just the idea of escapism is like, this is this fantasy world we can go to, and maybe some of our problems can be solved with magic, and maybe there's other problems created by magic. But yeah, well, can we talk about the Dumbledore then, the Dumbledore of it all then? Because you mentioned in this chapter, like, I don't know, when she said that he was gay, like, I also didn't really have much of a reaction to that. Like, it didn't really mean any, I don't think I reacted really at all. I was just like, okay, sure, whatever. I kind of brushed it off. And that's how you felt, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think like that it is like so possible that part of that reaction was just like being closeted and being like, no, that doesn't matter. Like, right? Like, so here I wrote this in the book, but like my reaction to Dumbledore being gay is I was like, as a Potter purist, I am sticking to the text and I am looking for like what specifically in the text, like she didn't say that in the book, so like it doesn't count. And like, but like that obviously could have just been like a mechanism or like a defense mechanism for myself of being like, this doesn't apply to me, putting in a box, putting it in the back of my brain. Yeah, so then it was funny, like for like researching this essay, I was going back and like reading a lot of like the sort of like think pieces of the time, because there was this debate. And that's what I was doing a lot in the book overall. Like for a lot of this, I was trying to figure out like, what was the conversation that like critics were having at the time about these things? Like, how was it perceived by like the public versus how it was perceived like by me as a teenager? But a huge part of like, after the Dumbledore thing came out, there was this big debate sort of whether or not like whether or not it counted, right? Like, which I mentioned in the excerpt I just read. But yeah, it was like this weird, like, you know, there was like one, I think it's like Entertainment Weekly review was basically like, this is amazing, this is representation, this is like blah, 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 like we stan. And then, you know, someone in the New York Times being like, I don't think this really counts, this doesn't really do anything, like no one should have to believe this, which like at the same time, like while I like agree with that side, like reading it now, it feels homophobic, right? Like it feels like we're kind of bending over backwards to say, no, he's not really gay, it doesn't really count. Whereas like if we had learned in the seventh, or if we had learned not in the seventh book, but like, you know, after they had been published, that like, oh, Dumbledore like had a wife who died and therefore she wasn't like, and she didn't apply to the story, so she like wasn't mentioned, no one would be like, does this count? Like no one would give a shit, right? Like it's so there's no, you can believe whatever you want with it, but like I think that even just like inserting the idea that Dumbledore could be gay into the Potter like dialogue, greater like cultural phenomenon, like insert some queerness into the story whether you like it or not, you know, and inserts it in there whether or not you like think it's canon. So
yeah, well it's so interesting because you kind of equate what J.K. Rowling does after the fact and says like, yeah, he was gay. You kind of draw the line, I guess, between that and like what any given fan did growing up. You know, you talked about slash fiction. It's like a lot of us were reading into these stories and seeing queerness and relationships in these characters that weren't explicitly there regardless. And yes, on one end, like J.K. Rowling doing that feels like, I don't know, what do you want? A cookie? Like, great, you made a gay character, I guess. But like the flip side of that is just that, like, as fans, if we're reading queerness into it and getting value out of that, I think that that's extremely valid. And that's kind of what you tap into with this.
Yeah, I think that it's, and this essay is at the beginning of the book for a reason. But it kind of is how I approached like a lot of the different pieces of entertainment that I talk about in this, right? Because like the kind of the whole basis of like why I wanted to write this book was like, wow, there really was not a lot of like pop culture, especially not like made for teenagers, that was like explicitly had queer characters or, you know, at the time. And so, you know, I wanted to look into like, well, I clearly still got some like built some sort of like sexuality, gender identity, something like pulled that out of this pop culture that I was engaging with. And so, yeah, I mean, like, I think Harry Potter is like a perfect example of just like, you know, like you said, if whatever you pull out of it, like in your relationship with the story and with the text, like that's the most valuable thing. And I just like saw myself doing that over and over again with like different pieces of entertainment too.
Yeah, I mean, I'd mentioned to you previously, but like around the time when a lot of folks were hurt about some of the transphobic things that J.K. Rowling was saying, Daniel Radcliffe came out with a statement. It was really, I think, well put. He said, and I have it here, so I'm going to read it too, because I think it's relevant to the rest of this discussion. But he said, if you believe that a particular character is trans, non-binary, or gender fluid, or that they're gay or bisexual, if you found anything in these stories that resonated with you and helped you at any time in your life, then that is between you and the book that you read, and it is sacred. And in my opinion, nobody can touch that.
Yeah.
Really beautiful. Well done, Danny. We love you.
Yeah.
But
Radcliffe, like kind of dark horse, like in being a child star who like came out to be really good. Like I'm sort of surprised that, I mean, he had some dark times there, definitely, which he's talked about publicly, but like, man, no problem.
Yeah, a good. We're thrilled about that.
We're thrilled for Dan, and I should probably have quoted that in my book, but I did not. But no, I mean that's exactly right. Like I think that at a certain point, especially with something like Harry Potter that is just like everywhere and such a huge phenomenon, like it goes out of the author's hands at a certain point, right? Like especially when it's like living in this world of like fanfic and it's living in like, you know, yeah, it just like Harry Potter just like permeated the culture so much that like it's actually really it's not about J.K. Rowling anymore. And I don't really know if there is like a line that is crossed where that the crossover and that's what happens, or if that's like that never really happens with art or entertainment. Like I think it kind of is like, even if it's something that's like small and unpopular and shitty, like ultimately what matters is like what you take out of it, you know?
Yeah. And really to zoom out a little bit more and talk about just this book in general, I think that's something that really is the perspective you bring to a lot of the stuff you're revisiting. I mean, obviously we're in the age of the hot take, I guess, you know, where it's like, well, actually that thing that you liked sucks, and here's why. You know, this is not a hit list. This is not a book where you're going back through the stuff that we grew up on and being like, this is bad. It's really kind of trying to reconsider it from this like modern perspective and everything that you've been through. Could you talk a little bit about, I guess, the genesis of this? I think you've mentioned previously that there was like a specific essay and that's where everything blossomed from, we'll say. So I want to hear more about that.
It sprouted, it weeded from it. Yeah, there's an essay about Katy Perry and I Kissed a Girl, and I wrote a draft of that in 2018 as like I think I pitched it around and it didn't get picked up. It was like 10 years after the song came out, so I was like, oh, this is like a look back kind of thing. And then I was like, oh, you know, and so in that essay I talk about the song and how I feel like I you know, it came out right when I graduated high school, and I felt like it sort of like taunted me a bit at that time. Because my paternal grandmother's name is Katy Perry, so that was like, a bit haunting, but also because like I had this like intimate relationship with a friend and was sort of, but wasn't really out and wasn't even really out to myself, and was sort of, it was the first time that there was like a explicitly like sapphic piece of like pop culture that was just like everywhere. And it was the first time that I was sort of like, it was like in your face a little bit. So anyway, that was so I, liked having, I had a good time writing that essay and doing that because like kind of finding that thread. And then I was like, oh wait, I can do this for all kinds of pieces of pop culture from when I was a kid. And I didn't really want to like wait until there were like 15 and 20-year retrospectives to be able to do that. Like, writing online, like the only times that you can write about something that happened in the past is if it's an anniversary or something, and like you have like a hook to it. So I was like, the book doesn't need a hook. Like I guess, or like maybe it does, but like they bought it, so that's on them. But yeah, so I think that like from the Katy Perry essay, I started just sort of going through and thinking about like, I Kissed a Girl is a very obvious one of like, why might this fuck you up as a closeted teenager? But I, what was really important to me in putting sort of the initial like list together and the final list together of like what I was writing about was I really, really wanted it to be stuff that I actually read and watched and listened to as a kid, because I think it's very easy to no, it's not even about that, but it's like I engage with media differently now than I did when I was a teenager, right? Like when you're a teenager, you're so spongy and you're really like looking for guidance on like how to be and how to treat people and how to act. And whether or not, I'm not like turning on the OC and being like, better act like this. But there's a part of you, I think, that subconsciously is still like learning about the world and learning how like adults are, and maybe thinking that that's how like other teenagers act or whatever. So, and I think a lot of that stuff is really hard to shake as you're an adult. Like even if you outgrow it, and even if you're like, oh yeah, that was like trash, like it takes active undoing, even when it's like harmful stuff. Yeah, I don't know. And then you were also talking about like it's definitely not like a let's look back and be like, oh yeah, that sucked. Like that wasn't like quote because, or wasn't, not even like just using the word woke like facetiously, but it wasn't, it doesn't hold up to the social justice standards of our time and our discourse now. And I think that like just because something doesn't hold up to those standards doesn't mean that it didn't affect you, and that it didn't, and that you, even if you liked it at that time, it's worth interrogating, like, why was I drawn to this? What messaging did I get out of this? Good or bad, And I'm very, very sick of hot take culture. So I was really trying to not have any hot takes in this book and being like, it's good and bad, and just like sit with complication,
Yeah. I mean, I really appreciate the way you dig into things. I think like as an example, you get really into the L word and what it meant to you and your development. Now, this is where I come out.
Probably the one where I'm most critical. Like that is definitely to be.
Well, I mean, rightfully so, probably. But I really love that even though you can be critical, you also are finding, I mean, there is some very, very good to pull from it. Like you talk about the L word as being like, not only is that one of the first times you're seeing this idea of queer community on screen, but you also are, whether you're fully aware of it at the time, you're building these bones for queer community yourself. You have these quick cultural touchstones to bring up with other queer women you meet or other folks that have enjoyed the show. Like, I think that was so fascinating to kind of hear that development.
Yeah, I mean, it's I describe the L word. I really think that the L word is like a rite of passage for so many queer women, of like my age. So it was on from 2004 until 2009. And then it went on Netflix and streamed on Netflix, I think in like 2011 or 2012. Like there was a really like relatively short gap from when it actually went off the air and then when it was just like available for streaming everywhere. Mm-hmm. So I think that made it really unique in that it was just like so accessible to like this whole generation of queer women. And yeah, it's not that the show is, yeah, so it's this like sort of rite of passage. So many people like, snuck it, rented it from Blockbuster and like only watched it when their parents went to bed, or like waited until they went to college and watched it like I did. And, or like watch it with their first girlfriends and like, yeah, it's not that the show was like actually like good television. It was literally just like, oh, this is like kind of all we have, and like we're all gonna watch this. And like I like cannot count the number of like conversations I've had with queer women where I'm kind of just like, we maybe don't have a lot in common or don't have a lot to talk about, and kind of like, like are like, yeah, like I don't know, we're not super vibing, and then you can just like bring up the L word, and it just like is like, oh, now we're talking, you can say like who your favorite characters are, who you hate, who you love, like, and it sort of like creates a sense of closeness with somebody, to be able to have like kind of a fluid conversation with someone, which sort of forges some kind of intimacy or some kind of bond, even if it's really superficial, like just over a TV show. It does feel like, I say in the book, this sort of like lingua franca, right?
Yes, yeah.
So yeah, it's such a, and it's weird. Like I didn't watch Generation Q. I watched the first episode and was like, I can't deal with this. So I want to spend my time. And yeah, I don't know if Gen Z growing up like has all these like awesome, growing up in like the 2010s, or just like way more shows with like queer characters on them. So I'm like, are they watching the L word? Like, I hope they're not, but like maybe they are. I don't know. I don't know if it's like still this sort of has this rite of passage quality to it,
Yeah. I mean, I think that could be set. Well, this is really kind of dovetailing with something else I wanted to talk to you about, is just that like, maybe not Gen Z specifically, but in the future, if someone comes to this book and I guess what would your hope be that someone would get out of this book? What are they going to learn about the 2000s culture? What would their big takeaways be about that time? This is a big question I've been kicking around.
That's such an interesting question, and I haven't thought about it at all. I mean, it is so specifically like, I think that like my viewpoint in this is really important, and that to like the book, in that like I'm not writing a, it's not like a guide to gay 2000s, right? It's a guide to like TV shows that I had feelings about in the 2000s, which is like a very different thing. Like, right? Like if I were writing like a guide to gay TV or whatever, like I don't talk about Buffy in this book, and like but that's because like I didn't watch Buffy when I was a teenager, and like so I didn't really like I watched it in my 20s, so I had these very much more like 20s like a more critical eye. I had less of like fandom, I think, than I maybe would have had if I had like gotten to it when I was a kid, and so there's that. I think that my hope is that someone would see that it is, I don't know, maybe for me, like I hope in a way that it kind of bucks the entitled millennial thing, and is not necessarily, is kind of showing like, yeah, things were like better than they had been in the 90s, which they have been in the 80s. Like I think that there is this, especially over the past like 50 years, like a pretty clear like progression when it comes to LGBT rights in the US. But I think to show that like it was still a really muddled and complicated time to be a teenager, and like I think at the same, like to the same effect, I don't know, I have like a sometimes I have this reaction when I think about like Gen Z queers, and I'm like, you had it so easy. But like they don't, like they're still right. Like even if they were able to like come out when they were 7 or whatever, but like there's all sorts of stuff that's still going to fuck you up and change the way you think, and I think that that's true for people of any sexuality, right? Like it was just so again like spongy at that time. So I guess that was like a very roundabout way to answer.
No,
that.
I mean, and that was a weird question. So.
No. But I think it's just like letting things be messy and letting yourself have like weird feelings about things that you liked when that might not, that like wouldn't get produced anymore, you know, and just sitting with that. I think that's something I hope somebody would be able to get out of this.
Yeah, I think you do a great job of highlighting that throughout the book. And you also do, not to say that we as millennials are special, but it was a significant time to come of age, just in that, I mean, the internet was becoming a part of our daily lives as we were growing up. And there really was, I mean, basically the last chapter of the book is about Glee. And you kind of talk about that as this like sea change time. And it's not like it was like a snap, Glee's on, everything's better, everything's different. But that does really represent something significant. Like we didn't see shows like that when we were teens.
So like I remember watching Glee when I was like in college. I didn't watch the first season, but I think by the time I didn't watch the first season, and then I heard there were like gay girls on the second season. So I was like, I'm gonna check this out. But I think I remember watching it, and you know, I was 20 or 21 at the time, and I remember being like kind of angry and being like, why wasn't this on when I was 14? You know, like it seems so small. Like it's not like the show is like, you know, the main characters are straight, right? Like especially the main characters that they focus on in season 1, like Mr. Schuster, who's Satan, and like Rachel Berry and Finn. Like it's a very like straight focused show. And then, you know, Ryan Murphy managed to like weasel the gay characters to the front and center, which is cool because the show did so well, it made so much money. Not for any social justice reasons, like, but I remember being like, why wasn't this on when I was a kid? Because like, it seems so, it's hard for me to like overemphasize like how few like gay characters were in like the major entertainment that we consumed when we were like kind of middle school, high school. And like, if a show like Glee had been on, I think when I was in like 8th grade or freshman year of high school or whatever, like at least there would have been that, like, I don't think that I would have like seen Britney and Santana and been like, I'm gay, you know, like it wouldn't have been that. But there would have been this thing that's like, oh, these characters who I like and think are funny and cool are gay and they're figuring this out. And at least it would have kind of opened like, maybe cracked open a door for a little more interior dialogue, you know, or even like dialogue between friends. Like, I think it would have, it's possible. I mean, it's impossible to say, but like, I think that they're just like these, you know, I don't think that like gay characters in pop culture are going to like change the world, but I think that like opening up that little bit of conversation and little bit of understanding is really, really valuable. Yeah.
I agree with that. And I think like, well, I should point out that I remember, I was in the same boat. I didn't initially watch it, but I think when I eventually saw the clip of the Warblers singing Teenage Dream, Darren Criss, shout out to University of Michigan. That's where, right?
Oh yeah, Ann Arbor.
Yeah, there you go. That's why I was like, okay, what's this? I'm listening. But yeah, I mean, at that point I was in college, and to back up a little bit, I mean, I remember watching the original Queer Eye, watching it with my mom and almost like laughing along and being like, I guess comfortable enough to, you know, deeply closeted at that time, comfortable enough to watch it and enjoy it on some level. But in my mind, I was able to compartmentalize and be like, well, these aren't me, because these are like men out in the world who are really successful in their field. Like, I don't see myself in that at all. But obviously watching Glee, when I did, I was like, okay, I can see how I would have maybe seen myself in bits and pieces of these characters and what they were going through. Yeah, I think you make a great point. It's like that might have helped in a way. There's no way to know.
Yeah, we'll never know. But I think that there are, I don't remember what I was going to say. Something about Glee. No, I don't know. Never mind.
Something about the Teenage Dream cover, which is impeccable and changed.
Which is impeccable, and it was it was in fact the all-male a cappella group from my college who did the backing tracks for that particular song. So that was It was a hot time to be in Somerville, Massachusetts, I'll tell you that.
Wow, that's huge. Yeah, that brush with greatness. Everyone was probably like, yeah, I know them. I know whose voice that was. And that's so
everyone's
cool.
like, oh my God, it's so cool. God, it's so embarrassing. Oh, send your questions, everybody.
Oh,
just
yeah.
a reminder, if you have specific things you would like us to discuss, let us know.
I have a question for you, actually.
Oh, great.
A series of questions, because you get in one of my favorite chapters, you talk about like the butch femme dynamic, and I have to tell you, before reading your book, and maybe I just wasn't on the right corners of Tumblr, I had not heard the term futch before.
That actually really surprises me, given how online you are. Like
I know,
like
right?
not like I so it's just surprising to me that like we actually get like different like algorithms. Like we like they know what to send us. But yeah, that surprises me. But it's okay.
The specific word I want to say, like, I know I've seen the spectrum that you talk about, and in fact, I remember seeing one that is like very specifically like Charlize Theron characters. Like Furiosa is, Stone Butch, right?
Obviously Stone Butch. And
but
then Atomic Blonde is probably right in the middle.
I think so, right? And then the
God,
other end,
Monster, I think is like probably like a soft quote.
Yeah.
Or sorry, Monster Ball, not Monster. No, Monster's Ball is Halle. Monster is Charlize Theron.
Monster, right.
Yes.
I was hoping that if I threw a few names at you, if you could help place them on that scale for me, just to help like shade some things in. So using examples that we touch on the book, which maybe we'll put a pin in this, but Satine from Moulin Rouge, I mean, that's high femme, right?
High femme, that's gotta be high femme. That's gotta be high femme, right? I mean, she's got the diamonds are a girl's best friend, like, I'm thinking of like the glitter ensemble, the iconic red dress, which I discuss in the book. She's got to be high femme.
How about Katie Heron, Lindsay Lohan's character from Mean Girls? Because I think maybe that changes throughout the film, but I don't know.
When I think of Katie, I think of her in that in the blue plaid flannel that she's like in on, like,
me too.
That is to me like the platonic ideal of Katie Heron. Like, of course she becomes, which I think like puts you squarely in the futch soft femme, or hard femme.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
The thing also that's tough about this is that like so kind of grain of salt on all this, because like I think that like you like inherently the spectrum only applies to queer women, because like the way that it just reads like I talk about this in like the Butch Femme chapter too, but like flannel reads so different on a queer woman than it does on a straight woman. And like, I don't know why that is. Like there's more gender fluidity, or not gender fluidity, but like kind of like straight women can sort of like float around on this spectrum and like maybe be like have like more of the like in terms of like dress and sort of more like the tomboy versus like the high femme, and like nobody really like clocks it as anything. So you know what, we're actually doing a good exercise in clocking it as something.
Yeah, this is exactly.
But I want to keep quiet.
Okay, I'll give you one more then. I'm curious where Brittany from Glee would land on the scale.
Probably still high femme.
Yeah.
Maybe not. I guess she doesn't have like a I guess probably just like square femme. Like, because like whereas I think like Satine, I think like kind of integral to high femme is really delighting in like the theatrics of femininity, right? Like, so that's the kind of person who's really like dressing up all the time. You're doing big makeup, you're doing big nails, glitter, like all of this stuff. And I think is like, that is something to me also that like reads as very queer, because it is even though like the thing I am describing is like what is marketed to us as like the height of femininity or whatever. But it does, I think, sort of the like indulging in the just like the camp of your gender presentation in itself is a queer thing. So I don't feel like Brittany quite does that. Like, I think she's like pretty just like, I'm a girl with blonde hair. Like is a square femme. Yeah.
But the example you kind of bring up in the book in this chapter, which one of my favorite movies definitely like influenced my like comedy taste, was Best in Show. We've got both Jennifer Coolidge's character and Jane Lynch's character kind of on opposite ends of the spectrum. And seeing them together, beautiful.
I mean, Best in Show is the only piece of entertainment in the book that is like, was not like pop culture like at the time. Like, I don't think most teenagers were watching Best in Show, like, but I think a lot were. But it definitely, you know, it's not like Mean Girls or Harry Potter level of like 2000s-ness, right?
Yeah,
but I had to include it because it was like truly, you know, I said this about Katy Perry, about I Kissed a Girl being the first like sort of like lesbianism is everywhere thing. But I honestly think that like Best in Show, Jane Lynch and Jennifer Coolidge's characters, that was like the first like lesbian characters I like met and really like, I don't know that I loved them, but I loved like the story of them.
Definitely.
And I was definitely like very confused as to why, as to what was going on. I was like, why is Jennifer Coolidge like into this like boyish woman? Like, what is going on? But like such a good movie. Yeah. And like, same with me, like totally informed my sense of humor. Like all of those movies did, but like Best in Show in particular, I am just like, every time I watch it, it's just such a delight. And like, it was interesting, like going back and rewatching it, like as I was writing the chapter, I was like, I think I know what I'm going to write. I was sort of writing about sort of the way that like the cult, like pop culture talked about like lesbians and like especially butch lesbians around like in like the 90s and early 2000s, and was kind of trying to like place Best in Show in that. And so, and like I talk about, you know, my sort of, as I said, like confusion about butch women and like, and totally. Sort of internalized homophobia about it, and like being a very much a tomboy at the time. And I think being like having internalized this idea that like it's okay to be a tomboy, but like you have to grow out of it and grow into like a feminine woman, right? And not really having any like role models of you know, adult tomboys or like butches. And so going into that rewatch, I was like, oh, I think I'm probably gonna like see some, you know, shit of like why this character fucked me up, and sort of ways that it was like, you know, lazy jokes about butches that I haven't like encountered before. But like rewatching it, I was like, no, this movie is just fucking good. Like Jane Lynch is really handles that character. Like Christy Cummins is like a villain. Like she is for sure the bad guy. She, you know, like her dog is like, she's trying to like terrorize everybody out of like, you know, her three-peat or her like repeat championship at the Mayflower. But I think it's like because Jane Lynch is gay, like she was like, that character could have been played as a really like broad and like lazy and like kind of low-hanging fruit, making fun of butch women in the way that we saw on like I don't know, there's this SNL skit I talk about in the chapter that really did that. And again, like Tina Fey, Amy Poehler, Maya Rudolph, like literally all my heroes. But I'm like, oh, you guys are just like making lazy jokes about gay women. But because it's in Jane Lynch's hands, like you really see Christie's like roundedness. Like she is a really like fleshed out three-dimensional character. She just like is also a bad guy, you know? And it's really satisfying and actually really like, you know, exciting to see that was being made at the time. It just wasn't something, that idea wasn't something that was like, you know, it was like a comedy that was made for adults pretty much. It wasn't something that was translating into WB shows.
Definitely. Right. I think significant that it was, as you said, not like mainstream pop culture. It was more of a niche thing. We do have a question. So I think
oh my God.
We'll jump into that portion. So if anyone else has questions, you're welcome to type those in. I'm going to read this one to you. Grace, do you agree that there are some gay characters in film and TV written for straight people and some written for queer people? That is from Sarah.
Hi, Sarah. This is my cousin, as you might have guessed from the last name. Also,
yes.
The original Katy Perry. I totally do. I think that it is. I think that one thing that this is less of a character and more of like a narrative trope is like how much we see coming out stories. I think that the coming out story is something that is, it's not always written by straight people, but it's a matter of like the straight people who are the people who are, overwhelmingly, like in Hollywood, I think like a lot of like what gets made is based on what is going to make money and what people think is going to like connect to, you have to have a movie or whatever that is going to also appeal to like a straight audience as well. And I think that, I don't know, like to me, coming out stories often read as like straight people thinking that like the most interesting or dramatic thing that gay people do is come out or is like wrestle with their sexuality. And I think where we really see this is in like the trope of the now, so overdone like lesbian period drama, right? Which is like, I have the internet has made every joke about this. I cannot possibly like contribute to that discourse. There's so much, but like, and it's so funny, right? Like, but I think that like the appeal of it is not just like seeing, prestige drama actresses like in corsets or whatever. Like, I think the actual appeal of it is that sort of like, we can't be together, and like the tension and the like hiding it, the secrecy, the like internal struggle of it, right? Is like the drama of it is being closeted. And again, like I don't think that was the language, even that would have been, it definitely is not the language that would have been used in like whatever the Fossil movie, like at that time.
Right.
But, what is it called?
Ammonite. Yeah. But the Fossil movie subtitle, yeah.
The gay Fossil movie. Like they wouldn't say like closeted at the time because like that language just didn't really exist then. But yeah, like what the appeal of it is the not being able to just like live openly as a queer person. And I think that is something that is much more appealing to straight people than it is to gay people to watch, to engage with. I think of characters, two characters who I think I mentioned this in the book, but that like I love, but I'm like, this feels very much written by a straight person, is Max from Happy Endings. It was like, I love Max. I love Happy Endings. Like, it is a favorite show of mine. But Max is very much written as this like bro. And again, this came out in 2011. Was it 2011 to 2013?
That sounds right. That. Yeah.
Early 2010s. And Max is this dude who is like disgusting and like just such a mess. He doesn't really date. He has like no self-confidence, but he's just kind of this like, he's very much written as like anti like really fit femme clubby gay guys. Like he was supposed to be kind of just like a Chicago bro, but gay. And I think, at the time that might've been written as like oh, this is so interesting. We don't see these kinds of gay men, but like rewatching it, you're just kind of like, oh, this just feels like a straight person is writing, like, I'm going to write this character exactly like me, except every time I would talk about women, he's going to talk about men. And like, and that's just like, Max is hilarious. I love Max, but like, it doesn't feel fully real or fully fleshed out. So that's one. And then I also feel that way about Zoe Kravitz's character in High
Fidelity.
Yeah, which the like one, like, again, great show, loved it, but like the one like woman she dated, like it felt very like she's approaching it, that relationship, she functioned in that relationship the same way she did in the other relationships that she had with men, which I just don't think is very realistic. But anyway.
A tangent from this that I've been thinking a lot about is that we covered this on the AV Club pretty recently. There's been a reboot of Rugrats, and in this reboot of Rugrats, Betty DeVille, who we've all thought was this queer icon the whole time, actually is an out lesbian. She talks about ex-girlfriend. There's Phil and Will's dad, at least from what I've seen, is not in the picture.
Was he in the picture in the original? That's what I couldn't remember. Okay.
I mean, yeah, kind of part of the point too. But
yeah,
what I'm kind of, oh yeah, go ahead.
No, what were you gonna say?
Well, I'm just curious because like, I think in a time where we do have a lot more queer characters, I don't know, is it a good thing that back in the day we had this straight woman who wasn't the like traditional ideal of a straight woman at the time? You know what I mean? I think there was like there is a benefit to having seen different examples of a mother, I guess, at the time.
Yeah, of like womanhood looking different.
Yeah, like did we need her to be queer explicitly? I guess I'm curious what your thoughts would be.
And part of like making the subtext the text is like, oh man, like I think it was more fun when we all just like thought Phil and Lil's mom was a lesbian and got to have that. And now it's just like, okay, well now she's just a lesbian. I don't care. I think that's probably like, I think you're right. I think that also, especially like 90s, 2000s, there was, it had been a few decades of the women's movement. There had been like enough of a shift in culture for women, where more women were in the workplace, more women were dressing more, more futch, honestly, like more like androgynously, like not necessarily being in dresses and skirts all the time. Like there were different, like more women were like playing sports and working out, and that is very real. And I think that and more, basically more women were like kind of what maybe would have been thought of as tomboys in like the 50s and 60s, but now are just kind of women. And I think to me the danger of so there were all these kinds of women, but like none of them were gay, right? Like, or none of them were like explicitly gay, and certainly none of them on like kids shows is what I'm talking about. And so I talk about that in like the Disney Channel original movies chapter. And so I think the danger of it, I don't think there's any danger at all, of course, in like showing different kinds of women and how different people dress and act and think. But I think the danger, or like the kind of misguidedness of it, is when you think that is when none of them are explicitly gay, because then I had this like impression that like there is no connection between your gender performance and your sexuality, which just like isn't true. Like I think that I think if there also had been like a Phil and Lil's mom who like, on a different show, who like was openly gay and like there's more diversity in it, then it would be like, okay, cool, you could have this like butch straight woman, like that's great. But I think it's a matter of like not it kind of, all these characters kind of played coy in a way that I think was ultimately disingenuous.
Right. It just comes down to the more queer characters we see. Yeah, totally. I fully agree. I got distracted because we got another question and I got excited. This is from your Uncle Dave.
Oh my God.
Uncle Dave, it says, if you could get a signed copy of your book into anyone's hands, who would it be and why?
Wow. I don't think it would need to be,
Doesn't have to be signed, you're saying?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm like, well, I was thinking of like somebody who's like famous and interesting, and therefore I am like, they don't care if it's signed by me. I don't know. Part of me thinks Tina Fey, because I think that, because of Mean Girls chapter and being like, Tina Fey is such a interesting figure to me, because like comedy wise, like she is like, was so important to me, like as a teenager especially. And like, I'm such a 30 Rock person. I've watched the whole show through like a million times, and same with Mean Girls. I think that Tina Fey also has like there is a lot of, Mean Girls, I talk about this in the Mean Girls chapter of it being like weirdly homophobic, but just towards women, like not towards men. And that comes up a lot in 30 Rock too. And like, I love 30 Rock, but there's so much of being like, gay men are fun, lesbians are gross. I'm like, I just want you to love. And so, I wrestle with this thing with her of like kind of loving somebody who doesn't quite love you back. And so hopefully that would just make her love me back. And that's really all I want, is Tina Fey's approval. I think that
don't we all?
Yeah.
Oh, hi. Hello,
Hey,
Megan.
I think that's a great note to end this conversation on, because we've reached the top of the hour. But thank you so much to Grace Perry and Cameron Scheetz for joining us on At Home with Literati. And thanks to our viewers. Make sure to buy the book. The link is in the chat. But yeah, take care, everyone.
Okay, great. Bye.
Thank you
so much for coming.
Bye. Thanks for coming.
Bye.